Hello and welcome. This is the Zen community of Oregon, making the teachings of the Buddha Dharma accessible to support your practice. New episodes air every week.
So we start by taking refuge, by acknowledging the source that's bigger than we are, the truths that are beyond our personality. And the way we formulate that in this tradition is, I take refuge in the Buddha mind, the vast, inconceivable, transcendent truth. Take refuge in the Dharma, all those teachings from all the wise sages and all the previous adepts which point to the truth. And then I take refuge in the wisdom and the compassion of the Sangha, the community, which is of course always larger than any of our individual lives. So take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Good evening. I'm happy and amazed that so many people came out on such a cold, wet night. We are in a phase of practice this fall called Ango, peaceful dwelling, and it's a period of a slightly more intensive practice time. There's a little box on the altar here in the Zendo, which has people's kind of intentions in it for this next few weeks. Started in October. Started in October and ends December 8th at the end of our long session up in Great Vow Rohatsu. And people have been referring to Ango and the theme on Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, Sunday morning and Sunday nights, and sometimes at Trillium House throughout the week, and at Great Vow. So it's a theme that gets touched on in different ways throughout the week, different places. If you are not familiar with it, I encourage you to sign up for the Mattermost site. There's a page downstairs, and Linda Frischmeier, Choan, writes something every week or every couple of weeks about some aspect of Ango. And the text that we're using is one from an early Chinese text called The 8 Realizations of Great Beings. And so she makes a comment on that and gives some nice resources each week. Here is her current thing she said, week number 5. And we have combined the 8 realizations of Ango with Thanksgiving, which was just coming up. And then during last week, we just had a long retreat, which was about gratitude and Thanksgiving. So she says, this week, just relax with your gratitude practice. If you've not started a gratitude practice, you're invited to start one now. Writing down the things you are grateful for adds to its effectiveness. Often gratitude is said to be the antidote to dissatisfaction. In addition, it has been attributed to lessening of anger, envy, and comparison. Another benefit of practicing gratitude is feeling more connected to others, your community, and the earth itself. So she has that preamble, then she says, the 5th realization, the one we're going to talk about this evening, is ignorance leads to birth and death. Ignorance leads to suffering. Bodhisattvas, that is wisdom beings, are always mindful to study and learn extensively, to increase their wisdom, to perfect their eloquence, so they can teach and enlighten all beings and impart great joy to all. Now, this last week we had a long session up at the monastery, and one of the exercises during that retreat is everybody was given a small little booklet to write each day 3 to 5 different things you're grateful for. Now, if you're smart, which most people here are, it's easy to sort of rattle off, I'm grateful for the floor, I'm grateful for the carpet, I'm grateful for the lights, I'm grateful for the, But to actually stop and look into your heart and say, okay, right now, at this moment, today, what have I been touched by? What has really impacted me? What am I most grateful for. And then each day you write down 3 to 5, 3 to 10 things you're grateful for. Chosen keeps her little gratitude journal on her pillow. And so someone was telling me this morning, they said, look, if you keep it on your pillow, then in order to ignore it, you have to pick it up and put it someplace. So that makes it harder to ignore it because you have to have it in your hand. So she finds that is an excellent little boost. How do you make note of things you're grateful for? The psychological research is very clear that people who look at and reflect upon and bring to mind things they are grateful for are happy and less burdened. That's just the kind of ordinary psychological literature. And on a little bit deeper level, when our heart is grateful for the things that come towards us and grateful for the things we experience, it transforms our attitude toward them. It's easy to be grateful for things we like, but to actually be grateful for the hard times that challenge us, to actually be grateful for the, the difficulties that cause us to become stronger, that cause us to become a little more wise, is also an aspect of gratitude. And when we take on that gratitude practice, it fundamentally can change the way that we relate to the world. We had somebody who was at the monastery for several weeks who said that they were kind of a brittle, irritable person. All their friends were complaining about them. And they said they took up gratitude practice, and every day they would just try to turn their mind to what's grateful and write it down, write it down, write it down. And they said it changed their relationship to the world, and their friends began complimenting them on their equanimity, which was a surprise to them. So I encourage you, if you have not done a gratitude practice, to reflect, even right now, even right here. What's my heart most deeply grateful for? This is, in a way, perhaps the essence of spiritual practice. To be truly grateful for what is, to be truly grateful for the miracle of this life, to be truly grateful that somehow we're able to breathe and be alive, to be grateful that the texture of our life and all the things that we encounter in our life are part of our life. And when we're grateful for our life, we begin to be grateful for a much broader foundation for our life. The official theme for tonight is ignorance. The official thing that we're reading, the fifth realization, this particular translation. See if there's another translation here. No, this particular translation. Ignorance leads to birth and death. Now that's interesting. We think normally, well, we are born and we're dying. Why does ignorance lead to that? What is ignorance, anyhow? So to start off with, when we talk about ignorance in Buddhism, we're not talking about doctrinal ignorance. We're not talking about, I do not yet know how to do calculus. I'm ignorant of that. It's really ignorant about things that are more fundamental, things that everybody has the ability to see, everybody has the ability to know. To be ignorant or to turn away from or to not recognize the things that are fundamental to people who are really smart, people who are not so smart, people who are really skillful in mathematics or physics, and people who are really skillful in music and earth medicines and whatever. What is the truths that apply to all of those realms? Now there's a teaching in the Theravadan school called the Eight-Link Chain of Co-Conditioned Origination. Big name. But the first link of the chain that causes suffering is ignorance of the oneness of our lives. The first foundation of ignorance is that we think we are separate. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, we don't recognize the oneness of things. And in a way, it's easy to see, because I've talked in many different ways. The black box of the brain is the easiest, I think, because everything that you experience, everything you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and perhaps even think, is processed in the black box of your own brain. You know, all those photons and all those electromagnetic field impulses and all the vibrations from the wind, it all comes in as just static, as undifferentiated, as one tingling aliveness, and then it hits our particular information operating system. The impulses go through the neural network into our brain. Our brain then categorizes, shapes, and creates. So the thing when I was younger, I used to ponder that classic question: if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear the sound? But until the brain has processed the information, there is no tree. There's just there is no sound. There's just photons, there's just light. It's when it hits our sensory operating system, when it hits our senses, and the impulses goes to the brain then creates. It creates. We create our world. We create our world. Now, that, from one perspective, is the foundation of oneness. So if we see something ugly, it is perceived right here. If we see something beautiful, it is perceived right here. If we see something skillful or unskillful, it is perceived right here. It's all perceived right here. We are at the nexus. Well, no, we're at the focal point, the intersection of all things. Now, that is a profound, if we touch that, it's a profound understanding, because it means the ups of life and the downs of life are both my responsibility. I'm part of them. It means the things I like and I don't like are things that I somehow have a part in. It means the things that are easy and hard are somehow connected to me, to my view, to how I'm processing information. So the fundamental ignorance is the ignorance of the connectedness of all things. There is no evidence that we are not connected. So we take something like, there's a city in this country called Washington, D.C. Right now, right here, that is just a thought. Thought. I grew up in Washington. I have memories of it. So there's memories, pictures, images. You know, that's where it exists. For me, Washington, D.C., where I spent many, many years, is just a bunch of memories, perhaps some visions. But it has no other experience right now except for my particular way of processing it. The past is a series of memories. The only evidence there is that we ate a meal yesterday is a memory. A processing of thought. And as we all know, memories can change. Memories are not fixed. They're not in real time. They're fluid constructions. So anybody here who's grown up in a family knows that every sibling grew up in a different family. You know, if you ask your mother about a particular situation, she'll say one thing, and you ask your brother or your sister or another sibling, they'll say another, and if you ask the dog, they'll say something else. You know, we grow up in different worlds because we are processing information differently. So the first place of rectifying the issue of ignorance is we're not separate. We're not separate. It has nothing to do with liking or disliking. It has nothing to do with whether it's skillful or good or not skillful. It has nothing to do with whether it's poisonous or not poisonous. But we're not separate from it. So that means we have a taste of everything in our own being. Now, another place that ignorance catches us is the way the world is made. As we all know, when things are born, they're going to die. Duh. And so you think, well, why are people shocked when that happens? We all know that if something comes together, sooner or later it comes apart. If concrete comes together, all of you have seen old concrete, after a few decades it begins to crumble. If all the ingredients of a cake come together, even if you decide to hold it in pristine, untouched vacuum, nonetheless, the elements begin to come apart. Our body is constantly shedding skin, cells. Say every 7 years our cells are replenished, are shed, and new ones are replaced. So the first truth is the next truth is that no matter what state something is in, it's going to change. So if it's really good today, it's going to change. It's obvious. We don't think twice when we look at the weather. We have a great sunny day, we can enjoy it, and we're out in the sun, and tomorrow might be different. And we have a cold winter, blizzardy day, and it's the way it is, and tomorrow might be different. Everything is like that. So when we apply that to governments, to social conditions, to people, we apply that to our jobs, to our families, and we see that with clarity, then just like the weather, we simply respond to the weather. If it's cold, we put a coat on. If it's hot, we take a coat off. If it's really, really hot, we turn on the air conditioning. If it's really, really raining, we put out an umbrella. And we just respond to circumstances. But when we think, the weather should always be balmy here in Oregon, and it's not, and we get upset because the weather isn't the way we think it should be, or people, or places, or things, then we're caught by ignorance, because everything is constantly morphing and changing. And when we realize that, okay, no big deal. Cold, coat, wet, different kind of coat, hot, no coat, and you just adjust. So there's the ignorance of separation, there's the ignorance of not really believing that things are going to change. Now, if we have something that is really good, it's not frozen in time. It's going to change. It's going to morph. And that's one of the interesting things about social projects. We get something that's just so right. People invest lots of money into it. And finally, we get the whole thing fixed, running like a smooth machine, effective and helping people, and then suddenly it begins to fall apart. Any of you who worked in social services or any other institutions know that you've seen that process. I used to work for the Oregon State Penitentiary, the prison system, 30 years ago or so. And the Oregon legislature and the prison system put enormous amounts of money into the prison to work on rehabilitation programs for certain kinds of offenders to see if we could reduce the recidivism rate for those. And we had this extremely well-developed program, good assessment, and good treatment, good follow-up, and it actually had really good data that showed that it had an efficacy that was very appreciative, and then it began to fall apart. It happens over and over again. When we're ignorant of that process, then we get caught by the natural changing of things. We think that something is horrible and it's always going to be that way. We think something is really deeply stuck and a failure and it's always going to be that way. Every failure has wisdom in it, has the potential to find something that's really, really, really of deep value that couldn't be found any other way. And of course, every success has its own seeds of destruction in it. Not recognizing that is the ignorance that they're talking about here. Another place they're talking about ignorance is everything has multiple causes. I've talked about this a lot. In order to have a watch or a computer, I mean, this little mechanical $7 Walmart watch is composed of probably 300 little parts. And each of those little parts is made somewhere by somebody. And each of those little parts has to come together and be, it's composed of, it looks so simple, it costs $7 on sale at Walmart, highly recommended, lasts for several years. It's composed of lots and lots and lots of little things. There's a thing on the internet, somebody showed me one time, about making, maybe it was a cheeseburger or a cheese sandwich. And you can make a cheese sandwich, make a grilled cheese sandwich by going to the store, getting a piece of bread, toasting it, grilling it with some cheese, whatever you want to put in it. Cheap. Easy. But if you had to make it from scratch, you had to actually grow the wheat, and then you had to figure out the mill that was going to grind the wheat, and the container that was going to hold the ground wheat, and the storage facility that was going to allow the wheat to last long enough to grow a chicken, in order to get the egg, in order to go mine the salt, in order to whatever else they put into it, yeast. And I think they were estimating it costs like $15,000 to build a grilled cheese sandwich from scratch. Everything is made up of something else. And right now we are in this place in our particular country, you push a button and something is delivered to your door a couple days later. But it's the result of an infinite number of causes and conditions. Anybody who's flown an airplane, which I assume most of you have, you look out the window and you see this enormous structure of terminal and tickets and aviation fuel and all these people on the ground and all the machinery and everything it took to get the airplane together. And you realize it is this enormous web. And one glitch, as we've seen, one glitch in a computer and suddenly half the United States is without air power. Or one component of the synthetic rubber tires. They can't make tires, and suddenly they can't make planes. Or there's a component, a rare mineral that is missing in computer chips, and suddenly there's a dearth of computer chips, and then that has all sorts of implications throughout the whole system. Everything is made up of everything else, and everything has a value. So when we begin thinking it's very simple, oh yes, that thing, not good, that thing, good, it ignores that all things are made up of this intricate, rich, causal nexus. Nexus in the sense of a field of interwoven kind of information fibers. Everything. And so the ignorance there is that we somehow forget that everything is big. Everything is connected to something big, and we boil down to something small. We think it's small, it's fixed, it's good or bad, it's me or not me. So this particular realization is, as we practice, as we meditate, as we sit and look at the nature of reality, look at the nature of our mind, look at the nature of our own breath, look at the nature of how this experience comes to be, we can see the impermanence of it, the complexity of it, the miraculous coming together of it, the sacredness of it. It's all seen in this direct moment. So this particular realization of great beings means people who have practiced deeply, looked into the nature of reality, seen things directly, recognized them, and then learned to function from them. This particular bit of ignorance is, there are other things we could look at. So the 8 realizations, all 8 of them, are not dogma, they're not philosophy, they're just things that somebody with a clear eye can begin to recognize. And then we recognize them and we apply them. And so one of the outcomes of seeing this large view, seeing the view beyond our small and narrow picture, is that we begin to have some equanimity about the intricacies of the world. The world is incredibly intricate. It's much more intricate than any of us understand. I have some old guys who I have coffee with sometimes, and sometimes they were talking about the federal government, and they'll talk about the federal debt. The federal debt is trillions of dollars. Nobody understands the federal debt, much less a bunch of old curmudgeons sitting around a coffee shop. Not understanding that we don't know is a kind of ignorance. So everything is intricate, it's big, it's connected, and that leads to equanimity by saying there's a mystery here. I don't know, I don't quite understand how it's going. There's a mystery. And part of that, seeing the larger picture, is we have equanimity with it. We also begin to have appreciation. If you have appreciation for this life, which is the foundation of all Dharma, appreciation for this life and for this breath, for your life and for your breath, and we begin having appreciation for the things that this life sees, the things that come in, the things that are processed by the black box, and we begin to have appreciation for the intricacy of this world. We begin to have appreciation, maybe compassion for those who are suffering, maybe loving kindness for everybody else. All that comes out of the direct experience of meditation. Now, when we say direct experience of meditation, there's 2 levels. One level is, as we're breathing, there is experience that can be had which is not cognitive, which does not require our mental processing. And that can really be viscerally experienced. You can viscerally experience the tingling changing of all life. You can viscerally experience things coming together and coming apart. You can viscerally experience that everything is made up of something else. You can viscerally experience that things come out of the void, out of the mystery. But then there's also the rational understanding. So to have a rational understanding of karma, the law of cause and effect, have a rational understanding of, all things are made up of other things, I think is part of intelligence and part of education. So, the 5th realization of great beings is ignorance is at the cause of suffering. And by looking deeply, by apprehending directly, we can begin to see beyond that ignorance. And see beyond that ignorance reduces so much fear and so much suffering and so much of that tight, narrow, trembling sense of self. And we call that liberation. So may each person here know liberation. May each person here know that kind of freedom that allows us to function in the miracle and the intricacy of this life. Again, Linda has a whole writing up on this. Probably it said something different than I just said, but I encourage you to take a look at hers. Okay, any comments, questions, objections, insights, examples of how this may or may not relate? Yes, please.
The right description
Oh, wait, there's a microphone. We have all these people online, so when you use the microphone and you hold it up like an ice cream cone, then they can hear you.
Would you provide a description of birth and death?
Prescription of birth and death, everything is words, right? So we have a word for up and a word for down. You say, what is up? What is up? Well, up is that direction, but relative to what? Relative to that direction. What's that relative to? Relative to the center of gravity of the mass of the earth? Where is... So birth and death, in a way, is the same thing. We could say that there's movement, not movement. We could say that there is... we can't use awareness, because if you're aware, you're alive. So no one is aware of death. No one is aware of death. If no one is aware of death, so then we can look out there and we can say, okay, there are things out there that are still, and things out there that are not moving, and things out there that are not breathing, and things out there that appear moribund. But my direct experience, is that alive or dead? My direct experience, the mind that perceives what we call death, is it alive or dead? And you'll notice that when you look at that mind, it's always present. So if we're really interested in the investigation of death, where does people go when they die? Then the way to find that out, the way to investigate that, is look right now at what we think is alive. We can't explore something that doesn't exist. We can only explore something that we can have a... So what is it that's alive? And that's the way we really find out what birth and death is. You keep going.
That question is kind of referring to the statement the Buddha made, with ignorance, you're going to live, you're going to have countless births and deaths. So that paints a picture for me that you're ignorant and you take on suffering because of that. And then it happens over and over again. So each life is an experience of not seeing the truth and ignorance.
Say that. So let's look at your life. How many previous versions of you have there been in this so-called lifetime?
Just one.
Your 10-year-old self, your 11, your 12-year-old self, your 13, your 20-year-old self, your 25-year-old self, your 45-year-old self. I don't know how old you are, but they're all dead. They're all dead. They're all gone. But are you gone? So, in one sense, the Buddha is just saying, okay, if we are confused about this fundamental oneness of things, if we're confused about the nature of mind, then the mind makes up over and over and over and over every day for decades of our lives. It makes up that kind of suffering. But when we can see clearly, there's only this moment. There is nothing else but this moment. There's no evidence there's anything else in this moment except a few thoughts, except some memories. So when we begin looking at the direct reality that only this moment, the only evidence I have there's anything else is just a bunch of thoughts which change all the time. If we see that, we begin to touch the birthless. And if we don't see that, birth and death are rampant. But the birthless can't die. So that's in a way what the Buddha is pointing at. Is he says, see the birthless. Right here, right now, in this being. So in you, all of your cells have changed many times, and you're not the person you were a couple of years ago. What is it that is the same? What is it that's constant? What is it in each of us that is timeless? So the Buddha says, when you recognize the timeless nature of your own being, then birth and death are not relevant. If you don't recognize that, then, the world is filled with death and destruction. Which is true too. Okay? Jisan wants to put in his bit.
Yeah, my 2 cents on this is the...
Two bits is a quarter.
is that ignorance of a self, that we think there's a self, and so we think that this self was born, and then we have this self and we think that it's going to die. And so even when this consciousness or this knowing goes through life and death, if it has that clinging to the self, it will get reborn as a separate self, that ignorance, until it's seen clearly.
And fundamentally, the separate self doesn't exist anyhow. And fundamentally, there is no separate self, whether you understand it or not.
Right, we experience that.
But that's the whole point. We've got to verify. We've got to verify all this. It's the fact that Jisan says something or I say something is worthless. You've got to verify it. Anybody else? Dr. Cole, are you waiting to say something? No? Fred? Okay, Tegan, go for it.
I'm very tired, but...
Yeah, thank you. You were at Sesshin, and you were there all morning, and here you came, and you were chanting all tonight, and here you are. I'm very impressed. Thank you for being so diligent.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up the value of human emotions, because just saying well, why are we shocked when people die or we lose things? I think because we're human beings and we love people, and grief and anger are important aspects of that, at least to me. And I I want to bring that up because I don't hear it talked about often here.
Good.
And I understand your perspective, I think, is that emotions are a form of suffering, but I don't really understand that.
Okay, I don't think I've ever said those words, but...
Sort of like that, if you're crying or if you have grief, that's a form of suffering and grieving, rather than it's an experience of being a human, no different than laughing or eating a sandwich with grilled cheese sandwich.
Mm-hmm. And pickles and mustard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So I think that when we have an understanding of these fundamental things I'm talking about, we can relax and be truly human. That's what you're talking about. Truly human means we feel the whole variety of, we're not afraid of it. Not being afraid of being human is, I think, one of the outcomes of practice. So if we're not afraid of being human, first off, there's an equanimity that's there, and secondly, there's a responsiveness that's there appropriate to circumstances. So there's times we find ourselves crying, and times we find ourselves indignant. But the fundamental, I think there's a fundamental equanimity that includes those. So thank you for saying that.
I'm thinking of emotions as well, and for me, I find it helpful to allow the emotions to flow. That's part of me, but the teachings and my understanding that I need to just experience those emotions and accept that they are, and allow them to flow through me, and not want so desperately to not have those emotions or have a different emotion. So to grieve when it's time to grieve, and not want to not grieve, but I just want to be happy or be different than I am in the moment. And when I can accept those emotions as they are and let them flow through, they pass through and move through. And it's when I try to keep them, prevent them, move them, change them, do something, control them in some way, and I suffer more and prolong whatever emotion it is that I'm trying to restrain.
Good, thank you. So let me talk about Dharma just a little bit. There's several schools, but the Theravadan school really says that it's very important to be removed, to take a step back, to not be subject to greed, anger, and ignorance. And the way to do that is to, in a way, not disavow them, but to become cool, become more removed. The Mahayana school says basically what you just said and what you and Tegan said, is that this is part of being a human being, this is part of life. And so it is impermanent, it will flow through, and yet that's the way that we connect with other people. If we don't feel human, we can't connect with humans. So the Theravada school says, well, you don't really need to connect with humans, that the truth is beyond humans. The truth is bigger than humans. But then the Mahayana school says, well, we're all in this together. That's the Sangha. And we have to be able to resonate with one another, appreciate one another. So you're in the right school. Anybody else? Please. Anybody online want to say something? Yeah, Fred, put your spot on and we'll get to you.
And I just wanted to express my gratitude for what you both for bringing those topics, because they exist as quite a big conflict in my practice at the moment. And as a newcomer to Zen meditation, it's feeling like a soft barrier to make entering further, just from my observations and listening and trying to learn. So,
what's the barrier?
It's this thing around I'm a very emotional person, and I take pride in that, and I see it as a really positive attribute. And sometimes the teachings are pointing to me or encouraging me to be a little bit more distant from my emotions, and I have a resistance to that.
Okay.
And I have a resistance to seeing others detached from their emotions.
Mm-hmm. You want me to respond to that, or you want to just let that set? Okay, so if we're doing Zazen, we're sitting here with Zazen, we have lots of different feelings. Our legs hurt, our backs hurt, we remember something that causes our heart to ache, we remember something that's joyful. If we're sitting in Zazen, we have lots of different experiences. The ability to actually sit and hold, to be willing to feel all that is human, is part of Zazen. So if we feel something really scary and we collapse, we stop feeling it and we go into reactivity. If we're feeling deeply loving and suddenly we stop feeling it and go into fantasy, we stop really experiencing it. So the part of Zazen that at least the way I talk about it here, is we have to be willing to feel the whole thing without the story. So feeling without the story is often very different than feeling it with the story, because sometimes we get so caught in the story that we actually stop experiencing it. So that's the way, at least the way that we talk about it around here. Experience deeply, 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 right to the bottom. We'll let go of the story about it. Because, we can make up all kinds of stories. And the thing I was always very interested in is, if you feel the anxiety, if you're just afraid somebody's going to break up with you, or you've got a public speaking event, then that sensation is interpreted one way. If you're standing at Disneyland and you're about ready to go to a roller coaster, that sensation is interpreted a totally different way. The story is different. There are no circuitries for anger. There's no circuitry. But rather there's sensations in the body which we interpret according to different sensations, different circumstances. So being willing to feel without the story gives you a lot of latitude. That's the least the teaching that we have here. Fred, you have something to say online? Thank you.
Oh, it just occurred to me how important, how hand in hand humility has to be to this appreciation of ignorance. Otherwise, part of this process of appreciating ignorance is recognizing the fiction of bringing some up into my own life and egotism and that attachment to an idea about how things are, but to be able to be humble and step back and say, gee, this is incredibly complicated. It doesn't mean I don't know anything, but it seems like appreciating your talk about ignorance is intimately connected to humility, which eventually I think does lead to the deep wisdom. That wisdom of not knowing is the most intimate.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. If there's no humility, then there's no spiritual practice. That's why we have what we call the prostrations, the yoga posture of humility.
I was thinking about this idea of emotions, because I don't know what that means a little bit, because they're created by thoughts or reactivity or different phenomena can create numerous emotions. But there's something about the practice that Fred said humility, but I use the word vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that vulnerability is for me going into the experience. Sometimes that is in the form of emotion. Sometimes it's in the form of not knowing, or the beginner's mind, or not being attached to something fixed. So, emotions are too messy, the way I think about it, but there's something vulnerable in sitting still.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's someone here who's had a real intensive time with cancer, and very intensive time. And when we are deeply sick, or we know somebody who's deeply sick, we become so vulnerable. We realize our fundamental dependence. And then we also can appreciate the miracle of just being alive. We realize it could be snatched away just like that, and we're still here. We're not who we used to be, but we're still here. That is a miracle. And out of that miracle, miracles happen. So, without making a conclusion, it's going to the place of total humility, total trust, we discover something truly awesome about our life.
Thank you for listening to the Zen Community of Oregon podcast, and thank you for your practice. New episodes air every week. Please consider making a donation at zendust.org. Your support supports us.